Welcome to another installation of Salvation Army Trivia and History. Today I will be talking to you about India again. India is, like many places overseas, has a lot of fascinating stories about the Salvation Army's beginnings. Of course, it was our first quote-unquote missionary land, that being a developing place rather than one of the Western countries. And of course, it was opened by Frederick Booth Tucker. Frederick Booth Tucker believed very strongly that the Salvation Army or any Christian enterprise was not going to go very far unless it adopted the local way of living. That included the way people dressed. And when he selected the uniform for the Salvation Army there, he chose to model it after the clothing worn by the beggar class, or caste, as of course the caste system was in place in that time. Still is somewhat, but not as marked as it was then. And he also said that the Indian people would not believe until the English people took their boots off. And of course, he practiced that. He went barefoot. That took some doing for someone who had been raised in a very proper British home and rarely let his little bare feet ever touch anything outside of a home. So the story goes that one day he was traveling with his companion Worsoria, who was a wonderful, wonderful Indian evangelist who died young. It was really a loss to the army because Worsoria was brilliant. They were traveling and going from one place to another. They got to a certain village that rarely saw white people, so he was kind of a rather interesting spectacle just because he was white. But they tried to preach, they tried to witness, they couldn't get anywhere with the people in that village. So finally, they were exhausted from their journey. It was, of course, very hot. And so just outside the village, they found a shady tree, and they lay down, and they both fell into a deep sleep. Well, while they were asleep, the people of the village were curious, and they came around, and they started looking at them closer, and they were fascinated with their feet because they could see, when they looked especially at Booth Tucker's feet, that they were calloused, they were bleeding, and they were not at all like the feet of British people who were then in the Indian subcontinent. And so that spectacle of their feet spoke to them in a way that none of the preaching did. And they thought, what kind of a person takes off their shoes and walks around like we do, has bleeding feet like we do, has calloused feet like we do? And when they woke up, they found that they were surrounded by a whole large group of people from the village who wanted to hear what they had to say. And that opened the gospel to that village. And of course, they established a core there and had a wonderful ministry there, still is going to this day. I guess the point of this story is not just what they did, but we need to remember it's what we are in our unguarded moments that often speaks to people. We're a witness when we don't expect to be, any more than Booth Tucker did when he laid down to take his nap. But God used that, and God can use us in those unguarded moments. Well, thank you for joining me today. God bless you.